Day 57. And today, the department investigating Nancy Guthrie's kidnapping is in crisis, not just under scrutiny, not just facing public criticism from commentators who never liked the sheriff, in crisis. Real, documented institutional crisis. The kind that does not come from one bad press conference or one contradictory statement. The kind that comes from a pattern, from accumulation. From week after week of decisions and incidents and revelations that build on each other until the picture they form is impossible to look away from. In the past 72 hours alone, 3 separate developments have emerged about the Pima County Sheriff's Department, the agency that has been leading the search for Nancy Guthrie since the morning of February 1st, 2026, that together paint a picture of an institution dealing with serious questions about its own integrity at the exact moment it is supposed to be solving the most high-profile missing persons case in America. First, a deputy from the department was arrested on a kidnapping charge. He was arrested while on duty. He was arrested for an alleged crime he committed against a woman who was handcuffed and entirely in his power. He was fired immediately after his arrest. And when reporters asked the Pima County Sheriff's Department directly whether this deputy had any role in the Nancy Guthrie investigation before his arrest, the department declined to comment. Not denied. Declined to comment. Second, the former Pima County Sheriff, not a critic, not a political opponent, but the man who previously held the exact same office that Chris Nanos currently holds, came forward publicly this week and said that the crime scene at Nancy Guthrie's home was corrupted, that the physical evidence collected from the property may have been compromised, that once a crime scene has been corrupted, you cannot reconstitute it, and that is the end of whatever evidentiary value it held. Third, the Pima County Board of Supervisors voted unanimously this week to invoke a rare territorial-era law, a legal mechanism so old and so rarely used that most people practicing law in Pima County today have never seen it invoked, to compel Sheriff Chris Nanos to testify under oath before the board about his own conduct and career. What prompted this extraordinary step was the surfacing of records showing that Chris Nanos has 8 suspensions on his disciplinary history. 8. Spanning the years 1979 to 1982, for 2 categories of misconduct, tardiness and excessive force. The hearing is scheduled for April 7, 2026, Day 57. No arrest in the Nancy Guthrie case, no named suspect, no confirmed proof of life, and the department that is supposed to be finding her is being forced to answer for its own history under oath. This is forensic disconnect. And this is Day 57. Before we go any further, subscribe and hit the notification bell. We are here every single day while this case is active, covering every development no matter how uncomfortable it is, no matter where the story leads. Today, the story leads somewhere that most outlets are not covering with the directness it deserves. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next, because this case is moving, and not in the direction most people expected. Now, to understand why today's developments matter as much as they do, you need to understand the full history of what has been building inside the Pima County Sheriff's Department over the past 8 weeks, because what is happening today did not come out of nowhere. It is the result of a pattern that started on day 1 of this investigation and has been compounding ever since. Nancy Guthrie disappeared on the night of January 31st into the early hours of February 1st, 2026. She is 84 years old. She was taken from her home in the Catalina foothills of Tucson, Arizona, a quiet, affluent neighborhood north of the city, in what the Pima County Sheriff's Department immediately recognized as a kidnapping. Her blood was on the front step. Her phone, her purse, her car keys, and her daily heart medication were left behind. The back door was propped open. The Ring camera had been yanked off the wall. And at 1:47 in the morning, a masked and armed figure had been captured on the doorbell camera footage before it went dark. At 2:28 in the morning, Nancy's pacemaker monitoring app disconnected from her phone. That is when investigators believed she was taken. The Pima County Sheriff's Department responded. Sheriff Chris Nanos became the public face of the investigation, appearing at press conferences, giving interviews, updating the media on what investigators were finding and what they believed had happened. And from the very first press conference, something was off. Nanos said he believed Nancy was taken against her will. Then he said everything was speculative. He said investigators believed the attack was targeted. Then he said they could not be 100% certain. He said he believed he knew the motive but would not say what it was. Then he said the evidence would guide the investigation wherever it led. He said cadaver dogs were being used in the search. Then he said they had been stood down. He said the investigation was active and ongoing, then he stopped holding press conferences entirely. For over a month, as of day 57, Sheriff Chris Nanos has not held a single press conference about the most high-profile case his department has ever handled. Meanwhile, the national scrutiny only intensified. True crime commentators, former law enforcement professionals, investigative journalists, and millions of ordinary Americans who had been following the case since February began raising questions about whether the investigation was being handled competently. A public recall effort against Nanos gathered momentum. His own deputies union, the people who work for him, who see him operate, who know what happens inside his department, voted no confidence in his leadership, and the Pima County Board of Supervisors opened an investigation into his disciplinary record and work history. That is what was already happening before this week. That is the foundation on which everything that happened in the past 72 hours has been built. Now let's go through each of the three developments in detail, starting with the one that has received the most media attention and working toward the one that may ultimately matter most. Travis Reynolds is 22 years old. He was a deputy with the Pima County Sheriff's Department, the same department that has been leading the Nancy Guthrie investigation. On Thursday, March 26th, the Tucson Police Department arrested him, not the Sheriff's Department, not an internal affairs investigation. The Tucson Police Department, a separate agency, arrested a Pima County Sheriff's deputy and charged him with one count of kidnapping. The Pima County Sheriff's Department confirmed Reynolds had been terminated immediately following his arrest. He appeared in court on Friday, March 27th. The judge set his bond at $200,000. His preliminary hearing is scheduled for April 6th, the same day Savannah Guthrie returns to the Today Show. Let's be very specific about what Reynolds is alleged to have done, not because the details are salacious, but because they matter for understanding why this arrest has generated so much attention in the context of the Nancy Guthrie case. The details establish a pattern of behavior, a willingness to exploit a power differential, to use a position of authority to coerce someone who was entirely vulnerable. That has particular resonance when the department involved is also investigating the kidnapping of an 84-year-old woman who was entirely vulnerable in her own home. According to the interim complaint filed by prosecutors, Reynolds was on duty and transporting a female detainee to the Pima County Jail when the alleged incident occurred. The woman was in handcuffs. She was in his custody. She had never been arrested before. She did not know what normal looked like. She was completely dependent on him to process her correctly, to treat her with the basic dignity that the law requires, and to get her inside the facility safely. Reynolds allegedly commented on her appearance. He called her hot. While she was still in handcuffs, he shared a vape pen with her. He told her he could help with her case. When she asked how, he allegedly explained that he would not go to court, meaning he would not testify against her, and suggested they could go to a hotel and have sex. He allegedly showed her sexually explicit videos. When she asked to be taken inside the jail, he refused and kept her in the vehicle. The woman told investigators she was confused and frightened. She had never been through the process before. She saw other officers coming and going with their arrestees, bringing them inside, processing them normally. She could not understand why she was still sitting in a car with this deputy who was making these demands of her. She was handcuffed. She was in his power. She did not know what would happen if she refused. Eventually, Reynolds got her out of the vehicle, but before he brought her inside the jail, he told her to expose herself. She lifted her shirt to show her bra, and then he brought her inside. Jail surveillance video confirmed parts of her account. When investigators confronted Reynolds about what had happened, he said he may or may not have been involved in showing her explicit material. He said he may or may not have discussed having sex with her at a hotel. That is the statement of a man who either genuinely cannot remember what he did to a handcuffed woman in his custody, or who believes that acknowledging uncertainty is somehow legally preferable to a clear denial. Prosecutors told the court the allegations were very, very concerning given Reynolds' position and the imbalance of power between him and the alleged victim. They also told the court there were indications the conduct may have occurred before, that other women transported by Reynolds may have been subjected to similar treatment. The alleged victim told investigators she is very afraid of him. The court issued a no-contact order and prohibited him from possessing weapons. His defense attorney told the court Reynolds has no prior criminal history and is a lifelong Arizona resident. Now, the question that the Pima County Sheriff's Department has refused to answer. When reporters asked directly whether Reynolds had any role in the Nancy Guthrie investigation prior to his arrest and termination, officials declined to comment. They did not say no. They did not say he was never assigned to the Guthrie case. They did not say his work was entirely unrelated. They said they had no additional information to provide. Let that sit for a moment. A deputy in the department leading the most important investigation in that department's history is arrested for kidnapping a woman in his custody. And when asked whether he had any role in that investigation, the department says it has no additional information to provide. That non-answer does not mean Reynolds was involved in the Guthrie case. It may mean nothing more than that the department has a policy of not discussing personnel matters related to terminated employees. But in a case where the integrity of the entire investigation has been publicly challenged, where the former sheriff says the crime scene was corrupted, where the Board of Supervisors is investigating the leadership, a refusal to simply say no carries weight that it might not carry in other circumstances. Now let's talk about Dr. Richard Carmona. Because his public statements this week represent something qualitatively different from the criticism that has come from commentators or community members or even from the deputies' union. Carmona is a former Pima County Sheriff. He held the office that Chris Nanos now holds. He ran the department that Nanos now runs. He knows exactly what proper crime scene protocols require because he enforced them himself, in that department, in that county. He is also a former United States Surgeon General, the highest public health position in the country, which means he is a man accustomed to making careful, precise, consequential public statements about serious matters. And what he said this week, clearly and publicly, is that Sheriff Nanos corrupted the crime scene at Nancy Guthrie's home. Carmona pointed to a specific documented incident, a pizza delivery car that was allowed to drive across the front lawn of Nancy's property during the active investigation. He said that if you are going to court and making a case, a defense attorney will stand up and say the crime scene was corrupted, that people were delivering pizzas, that you had unauthorized vehicles on the property, that the integrity of whatever evidence was collected there cannot be guaranteed. He said the evidence question becomes, how do we know this is real evidence? How do we know it has not been contaminated or moved or affected by the people and vehicles that were allowed onto the scene? He said you cannot reconstitute a crime scene. Once it has been corrupted, that is the end of it, because you have not maintained the integrity of that space. And he said something broader that goes beyond the specific incident with the delivery car. He said the public has to have trust in its law enforcement agency. He said you cannot lead without trust. And he said that when you have a sheriff who keeps correcting himself and changing his story every day, the public loses faith in you. Those are the words of a man who knows what it takes to run the department Nanos is running, speaking publicly about what he believes has gone wrong. This is not Twitter commentary. This is a former sheriff and former surgeon general saying on the record that the current sheriff corrupted the crime scene in a kidnapping case. Now let's talk about the Board of Supervisors, because this is the development that may matter most in the long run, even though it has received the least coverage. The Pima County Board of Supervisors voted unanimously this week to invoke what legal analysts have described as a rare territorial-era law, a law dating back to Arizona's territorial period, before it became a state in 1912, that has been used so rarely in modern times that most attorneys in the county had to research it to explain it when the board announced their decision. The law gives the board the authority to compel a county official to testify under oath about their conduct and fitness for office. They are using it against Chris Nanos, and they are using it now, in the middle of the most high-profile investigation his department has ever handled because of what was found in his disciplinary record. 8 suspensions, between 1979 and 1982, for 2 categories of misconduct, tardiness and excessive force. That is what the records show. 8 formal disciplinary actions against a man who now leads a department of hundreds of deputies, who is the public face of the search for Nancy Guthrie, and who has been making public statements about this investigation for 8 weeks. The hearing is scheduled for April 7, 2026. One day after Savannah Guthrie returns to the Today Show. One day after Travis Reynolds appears in court for his preliminary hearing on the kidnapping charge. Now, what could come out of that hearing? Several possibilities. Nanos testifies and the board concludes that his past suspensions, however concerning, do not affect his current fitness for office or his ability to lead the Nancy Guthrie investigation. The board takes no further action. The department continues as it has been operating. The investigation continues. Or Nanos testifies, and something emerges. Some aspect of his conduct, some pattern of behavior, some specific decision or action that gives the board reason to take further action, to call for his resignation, to demand restructuring of how the investigation is being led, to recommend that the FBI take a more dominant role in the case. Or the testimony reveals something more specific about how decisions were made in the Guthrie investigation, about crime scene handling, about evidence collection, about choices that were made in the early hours and days of the case, that has direct bearing on the strength of whatever prosecution eventually follows. None of that has happened yet. The hearing is April 7th. What will come out of it is not yet known. What is known is that the Board of Supervisors, which represents the people of Pima County, has concluded that the situation inside the sheriff's department is serious enough to invoke a century-old law and put the sheriff under oath. That is not a routine oversight action. That is an extraordinary measure. And it is happening while Nancy Guthrie is still missing. Now let's talk about where the actual investigation stands, separate from the institutional crisis surrounding the department that is leading it. Because those are two different things, and it is important to hold them separately. The FBI has been involved in this case from the very beginning and operates independently of the Pima County Sheriff's Department. It processes its own evidence through federal laboratory systems. It runs its own leads. It operates its own tip line, 1-800-CALL-FBI. Whatever is happening inside the county department, the federal investigation continues on its own track and is not dependent on Chris Nanos for its direction or its resources. The DNA analysis is being processed through forensic genetic genealogy, the technique that identified Brian Koberger in the University of Idaho murders in 2022. The process takes time. It requires building a genetic family tree from partial DNA matches in commercial genealogy databases, then narrowing down from there to find specific individuals who fit the physical profile of the suspect and were in the relevant area at the relevant time. It is slow. It is painstaking. But it has cracked cases that seemed impossible to crack, and it is being pursued here on DNA recovered from inside Nancy's home. Former FBI Special Agent Maureen O'Connell offered important analytical context this weekend about the dry run theory. Investigators have been asking Nancy's neighbors for footage from two specific dates, January 11th and January 24th. Both are Saturdays. The abduction happened on the night of Saturday, January 31st. O'Connell said the reason investigators keep returning to those earlier Saturdays is almost certainly because the suspect conducted reconnaissance visits on those nights. Dry runs to observe the neighborhood, study the routines, assess the camera coverage, and determine when the conditions would be right. In her words, if I am doing an operation on a Saturday night, I am going to do my dry runs on Saturday nights. I want to know what the lights look like at that time of night, whether she stays up late, when the neighborhood goes quiet, where the vulnerabilities are. That theory is consistent with the doorbell camera footage from January 11th, a masked individual seen outside Nancy's home 3 weeks before the abduction. If January 24th is also a date of interest, then what investigators may be looking at is a suspect who visited the property on at least 3 separate occasions before the night of January 31st. Someone who studied the target, someone who came back, someone who was patient and deliberate and who chose the moment with care. That is the profile of someone who planned this, someone who understood what they were doing, someone who is not operating in panic or desperation, but who has been thinking clearly about how to evade identification. Someone who has been terrified for 57 days, according to former FBI agent Jason Pack, but has not made a mistake that law enforcement has been able to identify publicly yet. The tips continue to come in, the task force is still active, the forensic genetic genealogy is still being processed. The FBI is still engaged. And on April 6th, when Savannah Guthrie returns to national television, the case will be back in the consciousness of tens of millions of Americans in a way that may generate the tip that breaks everything open. Savannah said it herself in her interview this week. Someone knows something. Even if that something is just that someone nearby has been acting strangely for the past 2 months. Even if it is just a detail that seemed too small to matter. Somebody knows. And this family cannot breathe until that person picks up the phone. The memorial outside Nancy's home continues to grow. Yellow ribbons and yellow flowers and handwritten notes from strangers who have never met her, but who feel somehow the weight of her absence, the injustice of it. The specific cruelty of taking an 84-year-old woman in the middle of the night in her pajamas, without her shoes and her medication, and leaving her family in a limbo with no end in sight. On April 6th, Savannah Guthrie will sit back down at the anchor desk. On April 7th, Sheriff Chris Nanos will sit before the Board of Supervisors and testify under oath. On that same April 6th, Travis Reynolds will appear in court for his preliminary hearing on the kidnapping charge. 3 events in 2 days that together will tell us more about where this case is going than anything that has happened publicly since the FBI released the doorbell camera footage in February. And somewhere in between all of that, somewhere in the DNA analysis, somewhere in the genealogy database, somewhere in the 40,000 to 50,000 tips that have been received, somewhere in the footage that neighbors submitted of their Saturday nights in January, there may be the answer that 57 days of searching have not yet produced. Nancy Guthrie has been missing for 57 days. She is 84 years old. She requires daily heart medication to survive. She was taken in her pajamas with no shoes in the dead of night. She left behind everything. And the department that is supposed to be bringing her home is going to be under oath next week, answering questions about its own fitness to do the job. Day 57. The questions are multiplying faster than the answers, but the investigation continues, and someone out there knows where she is. If you have any information about Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, please contact the FBI immediately. The number is 1-800-CALL-FBI. That is 1-800-225-5324. You can submit tips online at tips.fbi.gov. You can call the Pima County Sheriff's Department at 520-351-4900. Tips are completely anonymous. The Guthrie family is offering $1 million. The FBI is offering an additional $100,000. The reward can be paid in cash. 1 tip, 1 phone call. That is all it takes to change everything. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old, 5 feet tall, silver hair, blue eyes. Taken from her home in the Catalina foothills of Tucson, Arizona, in the early hours of February 1st, 2026. In her pajamas, no shoes, no medication. She is someone's mother. She is someone's grandmother. She is the woman who raised 3 children alone after their father died. She is the woman who showed her daughter how to survive the unsurvivable, and whose daughter is now doing exactly that every single day while searching for her. She deserves to come home, and the department that is supposed to bring her home has some very serious questions to answer. Under oath. Starting April 7th, hit the like button if this video gave you something to think about. Subscribe if you haven't already. We are here every single day until this case is resolved. Drop a comment with your reaction to the 3 developments this week. The deputy arrested for kidnapping, the former sheriff saying the crime scene was corrupted, and the board invoking a century-old law to put Nanos under oath. We read every single comment. We will be back tomorrow for day 58. Because Nancy Guthrie deserves to have people paying attention. And right now, there has never been more reason to pay very close attention to the people who are supposed to be finding her.